One day, 3-year-old Dorothy was playing by herself at home when she accidentally tumbled down the stairs. She lost consciousness due to a blow to her head. When her family found the little girl, she had stopped breathing. The family immediately called a doctor, but sadly it was too late. The little girl had passed away. Devastated by the news from the doctor, the family laid their child's body on her bed, and the doctor left to retrieve the death certificate. About an hour later, the doctor and his team returned with the documents. They re-entered the room with the family to retrieve the little girl's body and were met with a sight that shocked them all. The little girl was playing with her toys, as if nothing had happened. The doctor examined Dorothy repeatedly. There were no injuries, no permanent damage. The little girl was perfectly healthy and alive. The doctor expressed his astonishment, stating that it was literally a case of returning from the dead. However, there was one point where the doctor was mistaken. It wasn't Dorothy who had returned from the dead, but someone else. Dorothy Eady was born in London in 1904. Until the day she fell down the stairs, died, and miraculously came back to life, she was a perfectly normal child with normal behaviors. But after the events of that day, Dorothy's family observed significant changes in her. The little girl began to have constant nightmares at night. She told her mother that in her dreams, she was in a building with gardens and pools among large columns. For the following months, Dorothy continuously had the same dream, waking up in a cold sweat at night, crying, "I want to go home!" Although her parents tried to calm her by saying, "This is your home." This eventually led the little girl to become depressed. When her parents asked her where the house she wanted to go to was, the little girl cried and said she didn't know. After her revival, Dorothy's accent also began to change, gradually becoming a heavier and sharper English. This became so unsettling that it even prevented the family from finding a nanny for their little girl. One day, when the little girl was 4 years old, her parents took Dorothy with them to the British Museum, and things started to get strange from that moment on. Like many children her age, the little girl was quite bored at the museum, but when she arrived at the ancient Egyptian section, she was utterly captivated and filled with joy. A remarkable event occurred when she saw the pharaoh statues from ancient Egypt. Hypnotized, the little girl focused on the statues, let go of her mother's hand, took off her shoes, and began kissing the feet of the statues. She then shouted at those passing by the statues, "How can you walk with shoes in the presence of the gods?" Her mother was literally horrified by her daughter's behavior. However, Dorothy's excited movements suddenly stopped. Sadness covered the little girl's face. When her parents went to her, they saw her looking with tearful eyes at a mummy lying in a glass coffin. When her mother tried to pull the little girl towards her, Dorothy did not take her mother's hand. Looking at the mummy inside the glass enclosure, she said again, with that heavy Middle Eastern accent unexpected for her age, "These are my people." From that day on, whenever the family had the opportunity, they would take their little girl to the museum because it was the only place where Dorothy's face lit up with happiness. When Dorothy turned 7, her father bought her an Egyptian encyclopedia for children. The little girl's sole interest became the encyclopedia. She would examine the photos and illustrations within it for hours with her magnifying glass. When her mother asked her what she was doing, especially curious about the hieroglyphic writings, little Dorothy replied, "I'm trying to remember." For their daughter's happiness, the family bought all similar history magazines. In one of these history magazines, Dorothy stumbled upon an image of the Temple of Seti in Abydos. The little girl, surprised and confused, went to her mother, pointed to the temple, and asked, "Where are all the trees, pools, and flowers?" Her bewildered mother asked, "Where is this, my daughter?" With a huge smile on her face, Dorothy gave her mother this answer, "This is my home." Throughout history, there have been many stories of children remembering their past lives. Usually children lose these memories when they reach 5 to 6 years old. But in Dorothy Eady's case, events took the opposite turn. As the little girl grew older, her memories became clearer until she finally remembered exactly who she was and when she lived, 3,000 years ago. Throughout her life, Dorothy spoke openly about reincarnation in every setting. In the 1920s, when she was a young girl, this interesting lifestyle, tolerated by her family, was not so well received by British society. On one occasion, the priest of the church the Eadys attended for sermons came to their house and told them their daughter was no longer welcome in the church. When the family asked why, he explained that their daughter refused to sing hymns about Egyptian cruelty in the Bible and did not worship Jesus, claiming that this religion was a fake religion, adapted from ancient Egyptian beliefs. Dorothy spent so much of her time at the British Museum that, one day, the museum's chief Egyptologist, Sir Wallace Budge, began teaching the young girl to write and read hieroglyphs. According to Wallace Budge, Dorothy's learning of this ancient language was incredibly fast. Dorothy's dreams never stopped, but as the young girl began to understand the events, she stopped being afraid of them. When she turned 15, Dorothy often began to wake up from her sleep at night. According to her, she heard the voice of a being named Hor-Ah at night, and Hor-Ah asked the young girl, "You will write down everything I tell you." This continued for an entire year. Dorothy would wake up in the middle of the night, half in a trance, completely under the control of her subconscious, and write down everything the voice told her, both in English and Egyptian. At the end of the year, a 70-page book was formed, and even more surprisingly, the handwriting in the notes the young girl wrote in a trance was completely different from her normal handwriting. When Dorothy completed the 70-page book, she realized that the story she had written was the story of her own life. She had written line by line the life she had lived 3,000 years ago. Dorothy's life in Egypt was as follows. She was a woman named Ben Treshet, born in the city of Abydos 3,000 years ago. Her father was a soldier in the army during the reign of Pharaoh Seti I, and her mother grew and sold vegetables. When Ben Treshet was 2 years old, her mother died. Since her father could not provide her with the necessary care, he sent his daughter to become a temple priestess. When she turned 12, the temple where she was educated presented her with two options: either leave the temple to support herself or dedicate herself to the gods as a sacred temple virgin. Ben Treshet chose to remain a temple priestess and took an oath of allegiance. However, a few years later, she had a forbidden affair with the pharaoh of the time, Seti I, and became pregnant. When the high priest of the temple learned of the situation, he told Ben Treshet that she would be punished with death for breaking her vow to the sacred Isis and committing one of the greatest sins. To prevent the situation from escalating and bringing disgrace to the pharaoh, the young priestess took her own life one evening. Dorothy now remembered her entire past clearly, and as a twist of fate, shortly after all her memories returned, she found a job at an Egyptian public relations magazine published in London. After a while, through her job at the magazine, she met and married Iman Abdelmekut, an Egyptian businessman, and for the first time in her life, she had the chance to go to Egypt, which she called her true country. More importantly, she also had the opportunity to prove to the whole world that she was truly a reincarnated Egyptian priestess. Dorothy's marriage did not last very long because even though she was British and her husband and his family were Egyptian, Dorothy was much more deeply rooted in Egyptian customs than her husband and his family. And after a while, as you might expect, arguments with her husband's Muslim family began to escalate, and her marriage ended. During this process, Dorothy had a son, and she named him Seti, after the pharaoh with whom she had been in love thousands of years ago. She also changed her own name to Seti, meaning Mother of Seti, just as mothers were named in ancient Egypt. In 1935, Dorothy found a job at the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities. Despite being the first woman employee hired at the time, she quickly gained recognition in the ministry. She constantly wrote articles about ancient Egypt and translated newly discovered hieroglyphic papyri. As a result of all her efforts, in 1952, despite having no formal education on the subject, she was hired to work with the archaeological team responsible for the Abydos excavations. Finally, Dorothy was reunited with her homeland. In the years that followed, the public described her as a quite unusual figure. The main reason for this was that even after her workday, she spent most of her time in the temple area, constantly walking barefoot in the sands and performing ancient rituals in the evenings, chanting hymns that no one could understand. In 1957, the new official who took over the ministry decided to test this woman whose name he constantly heard. One evening, they went to a newly discovered large area of the temple with only the light of a torch. Dorothy had never been there in this life because it had only just been discovered. The ministry official asked Dorothy to lead them wherever she wished with the faint light of the torch. Dorothy proved to the minister herself that she knew every corner of the temple, like the back of her hand. She even went further, telling the officials that there were ancient gardens and pools in an undiscovered underground section of the temple. Archaeologists excavated exactly where the woman indicated, and indeed, the remains of ancient pools and gardens were discovered. Not only that, but Dorothy also pointed to another place, north of the temple, which had also been underground for thousands of years, saying that there was a secret chamber there, and excavation work began. As you can imagine, a previously unknown area was discovered there as well. By 1964, Dorothy was 60 years old and legally required to retire. The ministry made a special decision just for Dorothy, granting her the right to still come to work and participate in projects, even though they officially retired her. They argued that she was a resource too valuable to let go of, although her expertise was the Temple of Abydos. Dorothy also possessed vast knowledge about other ancient sites in Egypt, and many new places were discovered thanks to her. To give an example, she stated that the tomb of Nefertiti, which had been sought for years, was hidden beneath the tomb of her stepson, Tutankhamun. Tutankhamun's tomb was found in 1922, and Dorothy made this claim in 1972. Initially, archaeologists thought the woman was making inconsistent and fabricated predictions due to her age, as no trace of a chamber beneath the tomb had been found. In 2015, using advanced LiDAR technology, the area beneath the tomb was re-examined, and indeed a hidden room was found beneath the tomb, just as Dorothy had described. Another example is Dorothy's claim about the mysterious Sphinx. Dorothy spoke of a hidden ancient library beneath the Sphinx, and again, at that time, few believed her. However, just like the discovery of Nefertiti's lost tomb, a LiDAR scan was performed beneath the Sphinx, and the lost chamber was found. I want to give one last striking example. Dorothy claimed that beneath the lowest altar stone section of the Abydos temple, where she herself worked, there was a section belonging directly to the gods, dating back to long before even her own time. According to her, this section contained a kind of gate that allowed ancient gods to travel between heaven and earth. After the gods, during the pharaonic periods, the knowledge of how to use this passage was forgotten, so it was sealed off and protected as a sacred area. For those of you saying, "No way," let me tell you this. Once again, LiDAR was used to examine the area beneath the temple, and the exact room Dorothy had spoken of was found. The Egyptian government immediately prohibited excavations related to the room, claiming that the room was an important part of the temple's foundations, and that the temple could collapse, just as the same Egyptian government prohibited the excavation of the ancient Hall of Records beneath the Sphinx. Although reincarnation may seem like an extreme event, a large part of the world's population actually believes in this phenomenon. Especially in Eastern belief philosophy, detailed information on this topic can be found. According to Eastern philosophy, the souls in our bodies continuously move in a cycle until they once again reach the level of a divine being. Every evil or good deed we did in our previous life will help our soul progress in our next life, or, conversely, punish us. In short, we create heaven or hell in our next life through the choices and actions we make in this life. And ultimately, after perhaps dozens or thousands of lives, if you succeed in maturing, you truly get the chance to become one with the Creator. Dorothy Eady's extraordinary life and story are cited today as one of the greatest pieces of evidence for reincarnation. And an Egyptian priestess who took her own life 3,000 years ago has left us with invaluable knowledge about ancient Egypt today. Until next time, stay curious.